Well, good evening. I don't know how I'm going to follow that video. Man, what a cool day. Let me tell you a little bit about what I'm passionate about. So I was in the Denver airport several years ago on a layover. I had like 45 minutes to grab a sandwich and sit at my gate before my last flight would board. And I sat across from a businesswoman in her late 30s, and she asked me the question that I've spent my entire career hating. What do you do for a living? Because I'm a pro-life speaker guy. You know, it's like, assuming she's pro-choice, how can I answer this question in a way that's not going to get everything started off on the wrong foot? And so I'd never known how to answer that question. And so that day I answered her in a way that I'd never said before. But this has become my go-to response when like someone on a plane or whatever asks me what I do. So she said, what do you do for a living? I said, I try to help pro-life people to be less weird. And she smiled a little bit and said, what does that mean? And I said, well, I'm trying to help pro-life people to make more good arguments and fewer bad ones. But more importantly, I want to help people to connect relationally with people who are different from them, with people who are perhaps coming from a different religious background or a different political background. And when I say I don't want us to be weird, let me define what I mean by that. I don't know if you've ever seen pro-life people who can sometimes be a little bit like well-meaning but off-putting. That's what I mean. I don't want us to do that. Instead, I want us to live out Colossians 4:5-6, which says, conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be filled with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. I want to help the pro-life movement to be more like Jesus. I am fascinated by the question, what would it look like if Jesus talked to a pro-choice person? Like, what would his body language be like? What kinds of questions would he ask? What would he not ask? And what would it sound like when he made arguments that are grounded in truth, but spoken with gentleness and grace? I want to help the whole pro-life movement to get closer to that mark. So about 7 years ago, I began thinking about this idea that I want to talk to you about tonight, of this idea about how there's a lot of people who can't change their mind about an important moral issue in one day. That does happen. Like, we'll go into college campuses, and that's kind of where that's our lab. We do a lot of R&D, so we're just trying different arguments and techniques on college campuses. And about every outreach, we'll have at least one person become pro-life that day. So that does happen, but that's kind of more the exception. Most people need more time. If it's a serious issue, something that's kind of foundational to their worldview, they're going to need more time than one day. And so I started thinking about, how can we help those people? And then I ended up in this Facebook debate group, where I spent a year debating abortion with the same 15 pro-choice people, and there were a couple of pro-lifers like me. And I got into it because I saw it as a potentially interesting social experiment. Because up until that point, I had never spent more than an hour or two with a pro-choice person. And it's I could spend, hundreds of hours with the same people, really get to know them and test arguments on them, which I did, and I learned some interesting things. But I ended up, by the end of that year, myself being changed in a way that was really surprising to me. I began humanizing pro-choice people. You see, I'm really good at humanizing the unborn. But up until that point, I realized I had not been good at humanizing the flesh and blood pro-choice image bearer that was standing right in front of me. I would see them as kind of an avatar or something. But no, they're not. They're interesting, multifaceted creatures with different cultural backgrounds and desires and experiences and beliefs. I started seeing pro-choice people differently. So I started thinking about this idea that I call relational apologetics. And there's other people that call it that too. It's kind of an obvious couple of words to string together. But what I mean by relational apologetics is cultivating relationships with people who have different beliefs for the sake of genuine friendship and for seeking truth together. Said another way, I want to encourage more dialogue among friends and less debate among strangers. So this is not an apologetics talk. If you came here wanting to get all philosophical, sorry. Come hang out with me, and I'm going to hang out in front after the event. If you want to get into the violinist argument or with the fetal personhood argument that we've been using that's persuaded more pro-choice people than anything else we've ever tried, I'd be so excited to tell you about that, but that's not what this talk is about. I want to share with you something more personal. It's something very dear to my heart. I want to share with you a few stories to kind of illustrate what this looks like. What does relational apologetics look like in the real world? I want to make a couple of arguments for why I think you ought to do it. And I'm going to offer you 7 quick practical tips on how to do it well, because this is difficult. It's easy to be friends with people who are just like you. It's hard to be friends with people who are different. Let me tell you about my friend Deanna. We're going to try to put a picture of her on the screen. We'll see if that, yes, it did, okay. Technology is working so well today. This is amazing. This is all thanks to the awesome team in the back. So this is Deanna. So Deanna, pretty quickly after I left that Facebook group, it kind of got too big. It kind of imploded in upon itself. And so I get this email from Deanna. It was like an essay on why she's pro-choice. She'd been running the most intelligent pro-choice blog I'd ever read. And she'd seen me on YouTube, and she kind of liked what she saw. And so she emails me, says I would love to debate. And I could tell 2 things about Deanna from that email. I could tell, 1, she's smart. And more importantly, I could tell that she was open-minded, like really open-minded. Now, everyone says that they're open-minded. I kind of think that few really are about like the really important things they believe in. But Deanna was. Deanna was like one of those like awesome people who's really just seeking truth. And so those are the people you want to talk to. Open-minded people are the best people to talk to. Like really cool stuff can happen. That's where the magic happens. And so I emailed her back. I said, I would love to talk to you. You're awesome, you know. And I responded to like 1 or 2 of the things that she said. Deanna at the time identified as a pro-choice atheist lesbian in Canada. So you wouldn't think we'd have very much in common, being that she's from Canada. I like that joke. But we did. We have similar senses of humor. We're both really into philosophy. We're both really interested in this particular topic. We're both open-minded. That's enough to build a friendship on. And so we began emailing. 127 emails later, we were friends. It's a real number. I counted it. I've got it all in this big Word document. And after 127 emails, we began to Skype for 1 or 2 hours at a time. And that really positively affected the dynamic of the conversation. Now, I'd already been taking what I'd learned from the Facebook group on how to do Facebook debate well. There's a lot of ways to do it not well, and there's a couple of ways to do it pretty well. So I'd taken what I'd learned from that, and I'd applied it to the email. But still, once we got Skyping, the ratio of how much of the time we're talking about abortion versus the normal things that friends talk with each other about went from about 80-20 to about 50-50 once we got on Skype. So for example, she's asking me about how my wife and kids are doing. I'm talking to her about, she moved out of her parents' house for the first time. So she's there to walk with me, figuratively, through the terrifying journey of launching a nonprofit 5 years ago and support raising for the first time. Or is there to grieve with her when her grandfather died? Her first close family death since having become an atheist. We talked about same-sex marriage a lot, as you can imagine. And after 1.5 years of friendship, she would end up becoming pro-life. And there's this interesting thing that happened for her was she realized that her arguments had all been beaten soundly. And she was to her credit, too intellectually honest and virtuous to not ignore that. But she was terrified because all of her other friends are not just pro-choice, they're gay rights activists. Her Facebook timeline is a really colorful place. You follow me? That's her culture. And so for her, it's what will happen if I call myself pro-life? Will I lose all of my friends? And after 3 weeks, she ended up getting over it. And so she made a pro-life shirt. She got a blank shirt. She took a black Sharpie to it. It's going to be probably hard for you to read it. And so I'm going to read it to you. We'll see if the picture comes up. I'm going to try one more time to click. We'll see if this is working. Kind of. There it is. The shirt says, I think it's human because its parents are human. It's alive because it's growing. And all humans should have an equal right to life. So it should have a right to life. What do you think? She took that shirt. She went to the National Canadian March for Life. She came home, had that picture taken, and posted it on her Facebook. And at that day, Deanna came out of the closet for the second time in her life, this time as a pro-life person. Now, I asked her later, so tell me how you got over the fear thing. And she said she finally had this moment where she realized, like, even if the worst case scenario happened, even if all of her other friends abandoned her, there'd still be one guy on the other side of the fence welcoming her with open arms. And that was enough. That was enough to get her to commit and say, I am pro-life. And we ended up getting to speak together. We went to the University of Portland together and did a talk so we could just kind of share with people about our friendship and what was going on. I'm kind of not thinking that this clicker's working, so I'm going to rely on the guys in the back to advance the slides. There's one more of those. And just kind of start sharing about like, how did this work? How did we do this thing? And so that was really, really cool. We're still really good friends. We still talk. There's still one more of those pictures. I'm going to go ahead and share with you another story. I want to share with you a couple of other stories that don't involve me. One is about Megan Phelps Roper. So you can put the next picture on the screen, please. Megan Phelps Roper is the granddaughter of Fred Phelps, the former pastor of Westboro Baptist Church. If you don't know what Westboro Baptist Church is, this is this little church that's made up of basically all family members, 80 to 100 family members in Kansas. And they are a very infamous little church that has a very, very strict literal definition of the Bible. They protest military funerals. They believe that when soldiers die, then that is God's judgment, and they actually praise God when our soldiers die. They praise God when gay people are killed, because they believe that's God's judgment on them. They pray for people to be killed. It's a really, really not good church. Megan grew up in that church. Now, Megan's siblings, many of them became free speech lawyers. That's how they would win a lot of their free speech cases. Not Megan. Megan took a different journey. Megan became their social media person. She became their main Twitter person. Did you know that Westboro Baptist Church is Twitter? Can you imagine being on Twitter? I don't even want to be on Twitter, and I'm nice. Like, can you imagine what they deal with? Like, I mean, it's like, my goodness. And so, like, she's on there, hey, we're going to be protesting this military funeral, like there's a press release and snarky memes. And as you can imagine, 99% of what they get is hate. But a couple of people did more. A couple of people started asking her questions. Now, she was already ready for the frequently asked questions. How can you protest these funerals? That's so hateful. No. She was ready for that. But then the smart ones started asking her questions that showed contradictions between what the Bible says and their own actions. So they would say, for example, you say that you want soldiers to die overseas. How do you square that with where the Bible says love your enemies? And she'd be like, I don't know. So she'd go to her mom. Say, Mom, this person on Twitter, like that kind of thing. And ask this question. And her mom's responses were so dismissive and lame that it began causing all this inner turmoil for poor Megan, who began to realize with despair that she had been holding all kinds of mutually contradictory beliefs because she just wasn't thinking about those two things at the same time. And her world began to come apart. Then the people from Twitter started meeting her at protests. They would follow to see when they're going to, they're not private about it. We're going to be at this intersection protesting that funeral at this time. So people from Twitter would follow that. They come and see her. Hey, Megan, it's me from Twitter. They bring her gifts and talk to her face to face. She ultimately ends up changing her mind, her entire worldview. She ends up leaving the church, which means she basically had to leave her family. She stayed in touch with the people on Twitter, and she ultimately married one of them. She recently gave a TED Talk. There's a few years ago telling the story. It's amazing, as she just put out a book on this. It's a really cool story. But my favorite story of all time is about someone named Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis is this amazing blues pianist. I'm good at the piano. I will never be able to do what Daryl Davis can do. It's art, what Daryl does. He's like me. He's played with Chuck Berry and all kinds of other great musicians. There's going to be a picture of that on the screen. So he's this amazing musician. But that's not why Daryl Davis is famous. And some of you have already heard of him. Daryl Davis is famous for befriending members of the KKK. You see what happened? So he spent his entire childhood wanting to ask racists this question. He wanted to ask, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? It wasn't even about conversion for him. He just wanted to ask that question. And so he put together the strategy. He would have his white female assistant cold call these guys, including like state leaders of the KKK. And they would just assume, and they would let them assume, that they're going to go meet with a racist. Because in their backwards worldview, they couldn't imagine a white woman working for a black guy. So then they would show up to this restaurant expecting to meet with another racist, and there's Daryl Davis. Welcome, have a seat. And like half of them would leave, and like half of them would stay, like out of courtesy. And they'd start to talk. And then Daryl would invite them to go watch his band play at like a blues bar. Here's the thing. When you watch a black man play the piano like Daryl Davis does, it's hard to remain a racist. So these guys start leaving the KKK and giving Daryl their old Robin Hood. He's collected over 200 of them. Man. This is my hero. So here's the point. A lot of pro-life people can sometimes get kind of pessimistic, feeling like there are some people that are just unreachable. If Megan Phelps, who grew up being indoctrinated in Westboro Baptist Church, can change, if state leaders of the KKK can stop becoming racist and leave the KKK, there is not one person in the universe who is unreachable. But notice a lot of these people, the kind of the tougher nuts to crack, it took relationship. So I want to encourage you to do that. I'm going to make two arguments for why you ought to do it briefly. There's a pragmatic argument first. You will have a greater impact on the people that you're friends with than the people that you intellectually spar with on Facebook. Like, this is fairly obvious, I think, at this point. So something that I was talking to the Alpha team about, like we've both kind of discovered the same thing. It's really hard to help people if they don't feel emotionally safe. So the Alpha team is really good at making people feel emotionally safe. It's the same thing with persuasion. You are not going to change someone's mind if they don't feel emotionally safe because they're all defensive. They're in fight mode. They're not hearing you. So like when there's like one of those, like those like the 200 plus comment threads on Facebook, it's like all these people, it's like angry cats, like at each other. Like no one feels emotionally safe in that situation. So what you want to do is you want to get that. You might find a person to talk to in there, but you get them one-on-one. Get them in a private message thing or like an email thing. Or better, get them on Skype or FaceTime or whatever. Better, get them having coffee. That's the best. There are some people who will never become pro-life because they had one conversation with someone like me on a college campus. Like I think of apologetics as being like we're like removing hurdles. They've got like I'm thinking of like literally like hurdles on a track. Like what about back alley abortions? Ooh, good question. Let's take care of that. Oh, we got her body, her choice, right? Ooh, that's a great question. Let's take care of that, and just remove the hurdles, and get to the point where they want to be pro-life. As my friend Jim Henderson says, when people like each other, the rules change. So that's important. But it's really important to me that you hear my other argument, which is a principled argument, that it is just good in and of itself to love people. Joseph Pieper defined love this way. I love this. He said, love says that it's good that you exist. And insofar as I am able, I will contribute to your happiness, your existence, your flourishing. Love says that it's good that you exist. And insofar as I am able, I will contribute to your happiness, your existence, your flourishing. That's what I mean when I say that I love Deanna. I want her to be happy. I love to make her laugh. I want her to flourish. She and I might sometimes disagree about what flourishing looks like for her, but we're after that same goal. I had to spend some time, toward the beginning of this email exchange with Deanna, I had to justify the time that I was spending, because at that time, I was getting to be more busy. I was traveling more and stuff. And so I had to wrestle with this question of like, what if Deanna never changes anything, her mind about anything? Will I be able to justify spending 30 to 60 minutes per email in this long email thread. And I wrestled with that question for a couple of weeks. And where I landed was, even if Deanna never changes her mind about anything, it'll still be good that at least one person did his damnedest to be Jesus to her. I'm not saying, it's like not perfectly, like very imperfectly. I'm not this bastion of love or something like that. I'm just saying, like, it's good that someone's trying. It's the goal. Because, like, for me, what's driving me is I feel like I'm following another guy's lead on this. I believe that when Jesus nailed my sins to the cross, I was more different from him than Deanna was from me as a pro-choice atheist lesbian in Canada, while we were yet sinners. Right? So I want to offer you 7 quick practical tips for doing this. This is like I've just spent a lot of time thinking about like what is making this work and doing this with a lot of other friends that I don't have time to tell you about right now. So tip number 1, avoid long public Facebook debates. I'm glad that you kind of are with me. So I'm not going to say that nothing good happens on social media. As Sam Harris, a famous atheist, recently said, he's like, Megan Phelps is like the poster child of at least one good thing happening on Twitter. So like, I'm not going to say nothing ever good happens. Sometimes there's lurkers, there's people that are watching that might be being affected by like reading the debate. But if you can choose between an hour of time spent debating people on Facebook and an hour spent with a friend at Starbucks, do the latter. That's what I'm saying. Get them in a place, spend your time talking to people where you can help them to feel emotionally safe. Tip number 2, don't think of this as a war. There's this great TED Talk by Daniel Cohen where he said, if argument equals war, then learning equals losing. If argument equals war, then learning equals losing. So if the way that you think about the argument that you're having or the debate that you're having necessarily ends up with the result of learning is losing, that's a problem. Like, this is not an argument. I don't even think of this as a debate. This is a dialogue. It's a really different thing. I've done debates. It's like we've got podiums, there's an audience, there's points, there's winners and losers. This is not that. It's a completely different thing. There's no audience, there's no points. It's just us. And I see us as being on the same team. We're after the same thing. We're after truth. And we are working together, pushing against each other's views so we can try to discover truth together. And hopefully, by the end of the process, and that might be a years-long process, but hopefully by the end of the process, cumulatively, between the two of us, we have more true beliefs and fewer false ones. Tip number 3, find genuine common ground, especially common values, as often as possible. A lot of times people, like pro-life and pro-choice people, don't always expect to find things in common. We think of the extremes, because that's what you see on the news. But I can find common ground with almost any pro-choice person, and it really helps the conversation along. And I read this psychology study from Stanford recently that just blew my mind, and I wish I had time to explain it, but I don't. If you want to hear about it, come talk to me afterwards. I'll totally tell you about it. But I'm just going to give you like one of the conclusions I draw from it. The more that you can emphasize the commonalities between the two of your value systems, even if you disagree on the issue, the more in common you have at a values level, the more persuasive you're going to be. The more they are going to be able to imagine adopting your view on that issue that you disagree with. Do you both hate poverty? Talk about that. Do you both happen to have similar religious beliefs? Talk about that. Maybe you don't. So, be honest. But like if you do, talk about that. Do you have similar views about the role of government or the size of government? Talk about that. Any areas where you can emphasize the commonality between you, especially at a values level, is going to be really, really helpful. Tip number 4, don't think of the other person as your project. This is a really easy mistake to make. Like you start thinking of this person as like a potential notch in your pro-life belt or Christian belt or whatever. Don't do this. Because it ultimately objectifies the other person and ignores that it is just good in and of itself to love people. Tip number 5, don't just debate the issue that you're talking about. There's this weird thing that pro-life and pro-choice people do sometimes, where if they're going to talk, they're going to be talking about abortion. Okay, that's not what friends do. We're not constantly just talking about this issue. In the Facebook group I was in, we had this rule, free forum Fridays. Fridays, you were not allowed to talk about abortion. You could talk about everything else. And sometimes there's as superficial as what movies or TV shows we were into, but it got really personal really fast. There were people talking about the miscarriages they were suffering. There was one woman talking about the domestic abuse situation she was experiencing, and we were coaching her to get help. That really helped when we were debating abortion, because we began to see each other as real people. Tip number 6, understand their view well enough to show them why it's wrong in a way that they can hear and understand. That's what worked for Megan Phelps. She necessarily needed biblical arguments for her to change her mind, because she was very passionate about the Bible. A different interpretation of the Bible than I have, but to her, she was all about the Bible. And so it took people explaining the Bible doesn't line up with what you do to get them out. And I was listening yesterday on the plane to a recent interview with her where she explained she's still reaching out to her family who are still at Westboro Baptist Church. And she still does it. She does it both in private, like with letters, but she also engages them in public on Twitter. Because at least then she knows that her siblings are seeing it. And she still uses biblical arguments. She only uses biblical arguments because she knows that's going to be the thing that will help them. If I'm talking to an atheist, I'm not starting with Bible verses because they don't believe like I do that the Bible is the inspired word of God. And so I'm not going to start with, oh, well, you're pro-choice. Did you know that Psalm 139 says that God knit you in your mother's womb? And Jeremiah 1:5 says that God knew you before time began. In the New Testament, you've got second trimester John the Baptist kicking in his mother's womb in the presence of first trimester Jesus. And they're like, I don't believe in your book. All right? It's like it doesn't work. It's not helpful for that person. So I'm starting with secular arguments, philosophical arguments, to show them how reasonable the Christian worldview actually is. And then maybe down the road we can have a conversation about why I think there's this guy 2,000 years ago who walked out of his own tomb. And why, if that's true, he should get benefit of the doubt points on everything else that he said. We can have that conversation. It's just not usually the first one. And one more tip. I didn't put this on the screen, but this one's important. Allow the person to remain unconvinced. Allow the person to remain unconvinced. My friend Jonathan Fincher has this amazing quote where she said, people often change their mind slowly, the way water slowly changes the contour of a rock. That's the norm, which means that you're sometimes going to have a conversation about the topic that you're debating, and they're not going to change their mind. And you need to guard your heart from feeling frustrated or like a failure. No, this is normal. If you're a Christian and a brilliant atheist sat down with you and pummeled you in a debate, I don't think you'd become an atheist that day. Right? You'd at least go and talk to your pastor or your priest or maybe some smart Christian apologist or whatever. But you're not going to instantly, oh, I guess I'm an atheist now. Not that quickly. Right? And so we shouldn't expect pro-choice people or atheists to be different than that. So here's, imagine what would happen if everyone in Philadelphia did this. Philadelphia would change. It would take a long time. It would be messy because people are messy creatures. But it would be this amazing way to let God work through you. But I want to point something out. Alpha Care has been doing this for 38 years. I'm just trying to get you to do it. They've been doing this. They have seen the power of the impact that you can have when you pour into people for months, for years. Just last year, Alpha Care served 423 clients. But that's not the thing that was most amazing to me when I was looking at their numbers. Last year, compared to the year before, they saw a 69% increase in pregnancy tests and a 75% increase in ultrasounds. You don't have to be this brilliant business person to know that an increase in any metric at that level is huge. That is very significant. That's evidence that Brooke and her team are doing a great job taking Alpha Care to the next level. So I just want to tell you a few things that make me really impressed with Alpha Care. As kind of the outsider who works with pregnancy centers a lot and spent a couple of hours with the team yesterday, I want to tell you the things that I'm the most excited about. One, I am excited about Brooke and her team's care for innovation. It's not just Brooke. Kim is really about this too. Like, this is really cool. I get really excited about innovation. This is like a core value at Equal Rights Institute, my organization. Like, we want to be an innovative apologetics organization. And if I start listing for you my favorite national pro-life organizations, they pretty much all have this in common. They're innovative. They're not just doing the same thing we were doing 45 years ago. We're trying to figure out what is going to be most effective now that will help us to accomplish our mission. Not every pregnancy center is innovative. Some pregnancy centers kind of all look the same. Not AlphaCare. They are so outside the box. It's so cool, the kinds of things that they're thinking about trying. And it makes me really confident that they're going to continue seeing the numbers go up and up and up. They're going to keep on being way more effective because they are not stagnant. They are always trying to get better. And I'm also really impressed with their social work program. That is not a thing that every pregnancy center has either. They have a full-time social worker. You know, like pro-choice advocates often will accuse pro-lifers of only caring about fetuses. And to be fair, some of us kind of talk like that's true, so we need to be careful about how we communicate. But it's people like the team at AlphaCare and their social work program that proves we don't just care about babies, we care about women too, long after they've had their baby. We all know why we're here tonight. This is a fundraiser. This is a fundraiser for an awesome cause. So table captains, I would like you to take out the giving cards in the envelopes and pass them around. I'm going to talk about them for a couple of minutes. The first thing I want to talk about, you're going to notice at the top of the giving card is a new name for the monthly giving program. It's called Partner in Hope. And there's a new logo for it. And here's what's cool. If you look at your name tag, if you are already a monthly donor, there is a Partner in Hope logo on your name tag. And as a nonprofit director, I just want to take a moment and thank you for being a monthly donor to AlphaCare if you are, because monthly donors are awesome. Monthly donors help us to know how to budget, to know what we can plan to do. It's fantastic. And so I would like you to encourage you to consider, what could you give at a monthly level? Your monthly gift is what keeps the lights on. And if you're already a monthly donor, if you're already a partner in hope, I would like you to consider giving them a raise. They've sure earned one. I saw those testimonies. They've earned a raise. I also want to ask you to do a second thing. I want you also to give a generous one-time gift. This funds the vision. This funds their capacity to expand. If you're thinking, what would a generous one-time gift look like for me? I had this idea this morning I would like you to prayerfully consider. They were up in ultrasound 75% last year. Would you consider taking the number that you walked into this room planning to give and consider increasing it by 75%? Wouldn't that be a cool way to celebrate with them how much they've grown and how many people they're helping? You could write like a little 75% in parentheses, like so they could see, like that's what you did. How cool would that be? And if you don't want to do the math, like an increase, like just double it. It's fine. Just double the gift. It's cool. That'll do it. If you prefer to give through automatic bank withdrawals, ACH, there's a new way to do that. You're going to see a website URL on the giving card. You do that with your smartphone. You need to do it yourself. You need to log in with your bank. There's an iPad set up somewhere in the back if you don't have a smartphone, and someone can help you with that too. If you're planning on giving to AlphaCare this year, don't wait. This is the big fundraising moment. Plans will literally get made based on what the final tally ends up being tonight. And I firmly believe that the greater the number is, the more babies will be saved next year. Okay, so we're going to take 3 to 5 minutes and just give you a moment to think about your gift and to fill out the giving card. Don't leave quite yet. We're not quite done. Brooke's going to come up in a few minutes and offer a few final thoughts. I'm going to do something a little bit weird, which is play the piano for a few minutes because they were looking for someone yesterday and they couldn't find someone to do that, and so I'm filling in. If you don't like the music, don't blame them. They tried to find someone else. I just want you to focus on the most important moment of the night. It's not the speech. It's not the dinner. This is an important moment where you respond to what you've heard tonight about Afakir.